Whenever we talk about mental health, we're just trying to get your life together, really. There is this massive looming monolith in the room, and it's the gold standard. You go to a doctor or a therapist, and 9 times out of 10, they are going to recommend CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right. It is absolutely the default setting for modern psychology. It's
Yes.
evidence-based, it's structured, insurance companies love it, and for millions of people, I mean, it really does work. It helps you challenge those nagging negative thoughts and actually face your fears.
But, and this is a really big but that we are unpacking today, what if I told you that for a pretty significant chunk of the population, we're talking maybe 15 to 20% of people, that gold standard can actually backfire?
Completely backfire.
Yeah, and I don't mean it just kind of doesn't work for them. I mean, it can leave them feeling worse, more anxious, and honestly just a little broken.
It's a startling paradox when you really look at it. You have these people doing exactly what they are told by the professionals. They are pushing through the anxiety. They're doing the exposure exercises. And instead of habituating, they are flooding. They're just crashing.
And then, of course, they blame themselves. They sit there and think, well, if the best therapy in the world didn't fix me, I must just be unfixable.
Which is heartbreaking. And it's completely avoidable if you just understand the underlying biology of what's happening.
Exactly. So today we are doing a deep dive into why that happens. We are looking at a specific group of people called highly sensitive persons, or HSPs. And we are drawing heavily from the clinical work of Grace Higa and the team at the Balanced Mind of New York.
Their work is so critical here because they specialize in treating sensory processing sensitivity, which is the clinical term for being an HSP, and they have really mapped out why standard protocols fail this group and, more importantly, how we can actually fix it.
All right, so the mission for our deep dive today is to explore their DOSE framework. We need to understand the actual wiring of the sensitive brain so we can see why therapy needs to be adapted. It has to work with that nervous system rather than fighting a war against it.
That distinction right there, working with versus fighting against, is everything for this demographic.
But before we get into the therapy side, I feel like we have to clear the air on what highly sensitive actually means. Because in pop culture, it's almost always used as a pejorative. Stop being so sensitive or don't be such a snowflake.
Oh, absolutely. It's often viewed as a weakness or some kind of character flaw. But the research is very clear on this. High sensitivity is a biological, innate temperament. It is not a disorder. It is not a disease you catch. It's literally a survival strategy that nature built right into the genome.
And it's not just humans who have this, right?
No, not at all. Biologists have identified this exact trait in over 100 different species. Fruit flies, fish, dogs, primates. In every single population, you have this minority, usually about 20%, that uses a pause and check strategy.
So while the others are just rushing in to get the food or fight the intruder, this group hangs back.
Right. They observe. They process the risk before they act.
So biologically speaking, we need both types. We need the bold risk takers to go find new territory. But we desperately need the sensitive observers to notice the predator hiding in the bushes.
Exactly. If everyone was a risk taker, the species would die out from recklessness. But if everyone was sensitive, they might starve from hesitation. You need the balance. So being an HSP is just being on the observer end of that spectrum. It is hardware. It's not software.
Okay, so this is hardware. Let's look at the specs. Grace Higa uses this acronym, DOES, to explain the mechanics. And I want to go through these carefully because I think this is where the core misunderstanding starts.
It really is. If a therapist doesn't understand DOES, they are going to completely misinterpret everything their patient is telling them.
Let's start with D, depth of processing.
This is the cornerstone of the whole trait. An HSP's nervous system is wired to take information and send it through a much more elaborate processing route in the brain. They aren't just filing data away, they are cross-referencing it.
Like connecting new info to past memories and future implications.
Exactly, and emotional context, too. It is a massive web of association.
But here's where I get stuck, and I imagine where a lot of patients get confused in therapy. How is depth of processing different from rumination? Because if I go to my therapist and say, hey, I've been thinking about this one conversation for 3 days, they're going to say, that's anxiety. You're ruminating. Stop it.
And that is probably the single most common misdiagnosis for HSPs. Rumination is anxious spinning. It's repetitive, it's negative, and it doesn't go anywhere. It's like being trapped in a loop. Depth of processing is fundamentally different. It's meaning-making. It's thoroughness.
So one is a bug in the system and the other is a feature.
Precisely. If an HSP is thinking about a conversation for 3 days, They might be analyzing the tone, the context, what it means for the relationship, and really learning from it. They are mining it for data.
So if a therapist treats that as rumination and tries to stop it,
They're basically asking the patient to shut down their primary way of navigating the world.
it's like telling a supercomputer to stop running complex calculations just because it's taking a little too long.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads directly to the O in the acronym, which is overstimulation. Because if you are running those complex calculations constantly, what happens to your battery?
It drains immediately. You're just empty.
Right, it's a bandwidth issue. HSPs perceive more, they process it deeper, so their buffer fills up a lot faster than a non-HSP.
The source material uses the phrase "peopled out." I think a lot of you listening right now will feel incredibly seen by that specific phrase.
It is a very real physical state. When an HSP says they are peopled out, it's not that they dislike people. It's that their nervous system has reached capacity. They are full. They literally cannot take in more input.
But this often gets labeled as social anxiety or avoidance, doesn't it?
All the time. A well-meaning therapist might say, "You are avoiding social situations because you are afraid. Let's challenge that fear." But often, the HSP isn't afraid at all. They are just tired. They are biologically depleted.
Pushing them to socialize when they are in that state is like driving a car on an empty tank. It just causes damage.
Exactly. Then we have E, emotional responsiveness and empathy.
This is like the intensity dial being turned way up.
Yes, HSPs feel joy, sadness, and fear much more deeply. But the empathy piece is the real kicker here. They have very permeable emotional boundaries. They don't just notice how someone else is feeling, they often absorb it.
It's contagious to them.
If they walk into a room where someone is angry, their own body might go into a full fight or flight response, even if the anger isn't directed at them at all. They are open systems.
And finally, S, sensing subtleties.
The source uses a really great analogy here. It's the difference between a standard camera lens and a high-definition lens.
Right. Most people have the standard lens. They walk into a room, they see the chair, the table, the person. Basic data.
But the HSP has the HD lens. They see the texture of the fabric on the chair. They notice the slight flicker of the fluorescent light above them. They catch the micro expression on the person's face or the slight tonal shift in their voice. They are capturing exponentially more data per second.
Which brings us right back to the depth of processing. You get a much bigger processor to handle those massive HD video files.
Exactly. Huge file sizes take longer to render. That is why HSPs often need extra time to answer a question or make a decision. They aren't slow. They are processing terabytes of data while everyone else in the room is processing gigabytes.
So we have this vivid picture of the HSP nervous system now. Deep processing, easily overstimulated, emotionally intense, and hyperperceptive. Now let's bring gold standard CBT back into the room. Why does this specific cocktail of traits clash so hard with traditional therapy?
It comes down to the mechanism of change. How does CBT actually cure anxiety? Usually it's through something called habituation.
Habituation is basically just getting used to something, right? You do it over and over until it gets boring.
That is the clinical goal, boredom. The theory is that avoidance feeds anxiety. So we do exposure therapy. We make you face the scary thing, the loud party, the conflict, the crowded subway ride, and we make you stay in that situation until your anxiety naturally drops.
The idea is that your brain eventually realizes, hey, I didn't die. This isn't actually a threat. And the internal alarm bells finally turn off.
Right, but here is the major problem. For an HSP, pushing through high stimulation often doesn't lead to boredom, it leads to flooding.
Flooding, that sounds pretty catastrophic for the nervous system.
It is. The nervous system gets so overwhelmed by the sheer volume of sensory input that it stops processing entirely. The person might dissociate, go numb, check out, or have a full-blown panic attack. The anxiety doesn't drop. It spikes and it stays there.
So the brain never learns that this is safe. It just learns that this is torture.
It is actually sensitizing them, which is the opposite of the goal. It's re-traumatizing. You force an HSP to stay in a situation that is biologically assaulting their senses, like a chaotic, loud office or a crowded bar. You aren't building resilience. You are just proving to them that the world is indeed dangerous and painful.
And on top of that, you have the issue of validation. Standard CBT focuses really heavily on cognitive distortions.
Right, concepts like catastrophizing or all-or-nothing thinking. The therapist's job is to challenge your thoughts. They might ask, is the sound really that loud, or are you just focusing on it too much?
But for the
HSP, the sound is actually that loud. Their biological reality is fundamentally different. Their hearing might literally be more acute. If a therapist tells an HSP that their perception of pain or overwhelm is a cognitive distortion that needs to be fixed, that is incredibly invalidating.
It's basically gaslighting them about their own body signals.
It teaches them to fundamentally distrust their own senses. They start thinking, my body says this is too much, but the doctor says that's a distortion, so I must just be crazy. That creates a really deep, lingering sense of shame.
Plus, there's the pacing issue. The source notes that standard therapy is usually weekly, and it often comes with new homework every single session.
And remember those huge file sizes we talked about. An HSP might need 3 or 4 days just to process the emotions and takeaways from the last session. If you throw new, aggressive exposure homework at them every 7 days, you get a massive backlog.
It's the traffic jam in the brain.
Exactly. They just can't clear the cache fast enough to take in new work.
So we have a very clear problem here. The standard approach is often too fast, too aggressive, and it invalidates the sensory reality of the patient. But Grace Higa and her team aren't just tearing down CBT and leaving us with nothing. They have developed adapted CBT.
Right. And this is the really hopeful part of the deep dive. You can absolutely use CBT principles, but you have to completely re-engineer the delivery. And it starts with the cognitive side, changing the mindset.
And looking at the source, the biggest shift seems to be tackling this one core belief, the idea that there is something wrong with me.
That is easily the most common negative belief among highly sensitive persons. Because they live in a world designed for the other 80%, they grow up thinking they are defective. The goal of adapted therapy is to reframe that from I am weak to my system just functions differently.
I really love the analogy about height in the clinical notes.
It is perfect. Think about a person who is 5'2". If they can't reach the top shelf in a kitchen, we don't say they have a reaching disorder. We don't psychoanalyze their childhood to find out why they can't reach the cereal. We don't tell them to just try harder and stretch their arms.
They just give them a step stool.
Exactly. And that step stool isn't a crutch. It's an accommodation for a physical reality. For an HSP, wearing noise-canceling headphones in the office or leaving a loud party an hour early isn't avoidance behavior. It is a step stool. It's a vital tool that allows them to function in a world that wasn't built for their sensory hardware.
That reframing seems incredibly crucial for dealing with perfectionism, too. The source talks at a fascinating case study, a guy named David, who is a software developer.
David is such a classic example of this. He was incredibly detail-oriented, mostly thanks to his sensitivity, but he was completely burning out. He felt he had to be absolutely perfect at everything he did. And when the therapist dug into it, the perfectionism wasn't just about ambition or career growth, it was armor.
Armor against what, exactly?
Against criticism for being too sensitive. He learned really early on in life that if he was perfect, nobody could attack him. If he made 0 mistakes, nobody could pull him aside and tell him he needed to toughen up or develop a thicker skin.
Wow. So the perfectionism is quite literally a shield. If I score 100% on the test, I am safe from judgment.
Exactly. So the therapy for David wasn't just telling him to stop working so hard. It was testing the actual safety of imperfection. They had him do an exposure experiment. He had to intentionally do certain tasks at 90% quality instead of 100%.
That sounds absolutely terrifying for a perfectionist. I'm sweating just thinking about it.
It was terrifying for him. He was convinced he would be fired. He thought his whole professional world would collapse. But he did it anyway. He submitted code that was just good enough. And guess what happened?
The sky didn't fall.
No catastrophe at all. He realized that good enough is actually safe. And that was the massive breakthrough. It freed up that remaining 10% of energy he was just wasting on pure anxiety.
And this touches on all those should statements we all have rolling around in our heads. Like, I should be able to handle a loud party without complaining. Or I shouldn't need a nap after a normal day of work.
Those shoulds are usually based entirely on non-HSP standards. It is the 5'2" person saying, I should be able to reach that top shelf without a stool, because everyone else can. Letting go of the shoulds is a massive part of the cognitive work here.
Okay, so we reframe the thinking. That's step one. But we still have to actually live in the physical world. This is where the behavioral adaptations come in. And the biggest concept from the source material here is the HSP budget.
Yes, this is practical energy economics. You have to treat your stimulation tolerance like a bank account. You cannot withdraw more than you deposit. If you do, you go into debt.
And the interest rates on that nervous system debt are really high. We're talking migraines, severe exhaustion, irritability.
Exactly. Now, there is a specific rule here that I think is just brilliant for HSPs. The 70% rule.
Break that down for us. What is the 70% rule?
Well, most of us wait until we are 100% depleted, completely empty, before we finally let ourselves rest. We run until the tank is bone dry. But for an HSP, once you hit 100% depletion, you are in the danger zone. Recovery takes exponentially longer once you cross that line. So the rule is you rest when you're at 70% capacity.
That requires so much self-awareness, though. You have to actively notice that you are draining before you actually crash.
It takes practice, yes,
Yeah.
but it prevents the flooding we talked about earlier. It's like stopping for gas when you still have a quarter tank left, rather than waiting for the engine to literally sputter out on the side of the highway.
Now, what about exposure therapy? Because we said earlier that pushing through causes flooding. Does that mean HSPs just get a free pass on facing their fears? Do they just avoid everything scary?
Not at all. Avoidance makes anxiety worse for everyone, and that includes HSPs. If you stop going out, your world just shrinks until you're trapped. But the way you do exposure has to radically change. It's all about grading.
Grading, like giving it a score.
No, grading as in making the steps much, much smaller. Let's look at Emma, another case study from the source. She had severe social anxiety. A standard CBT exposure for her might be go to a crowded networking event and stay for an hour.
Which would flood her immediately. She would probably just end up hiding in the bathroom the whole time.
Right. So for Emma, they graded it down. Step one wasn't a networking event. It was getting coffee with one single person in a quiet, low-stimulation environment and for a very short, predetermined amount of time.
And the source also mentions that she started using noise-canceling headphones in her open-plan office, too.
Yes. That is a great example of environmental modification. Instead of trying to force her brain to just ignore the background noise, which we know it biologically cannot do, she changed her environment. And crucially, after every single exposure exercise, she actively scheduled recovery time.
That seems to be the really big missing link in traditional therapy. You do the scary thing, and then you treat yourself like an athlete who just ran a grueling race. You rest.
Exactly. You allow the nervous system to fully settle back down to baseline. That is how you build true resilience without burning out. You teach the brain two things. I can do the scary thing, and I can safely recover from it.
It's not just about generalized anxiety, though. The DOSE framework really bleeds into relationships and boundaries. This brings us to Lily, the therapist mentioned in the case studies.
Lily is such a relatable example for the E in DOSE. Emotional responsiveness. She was a therapist, she was a mom, and she literally could not say no to anyone.
They called it the empathy trap in the notes.
She felt everyone else's disappointment so viscerally. Because her emotional boundaries were so porous, saying no didn't just feel socially awkward for her. It felt physically painful because she was absorbing the other person's negative reaction as if it were her own.
So how on earth do you treat that? You can't just tell someone to turn off their empathy.
No, you definitely can't. But you can learn a skill called differentiation. The therapy focused heavily on helping her physically and mentally distinguish this is their feeling from this is my feeling. It's about putting up a screen door. You can see the breeze outside, you can feel the temperature change, but you don't actually let the bugs into your house.
I like that. And then there was the selfish reframe that they worked on with her.
Right. Lily felt that taking any alone time was actively rejecting her family. They had to completely flip that script. Taking alone time is nervous system maintenance. It's actually the only way she can genuinely be present for her family later on.
It's the classic oxygen mask on an airplane principle.
It's a cliche because it's profoundly true. If she is flooded and depleted, she isn't a good mom, and she isn't an effective therapist. She's just a raw, exposed nerve. She needs that scheduled time to reset the hardware.
And practically speaking, for HSPs, this maintenance often involves really protective sleep and wind-down routines. The source is very specific here. It says HSPs might need a 2 to 3 hour wind-down period before bed.
It sounds like a lot, doesn't it?
2 to 3 hours is huge. I feel like most people give themselves maybe 20 minutes of scrolling on their phone before they shut off the lamp.
And that is exactly why so many HSPs struggle with severe insomnia. Their brains are still actively processing the day's data. Remember the depth of processing. If you have been taking in high-definition sensory data for 16 hours, your brain needs a really long runway to safely land that plane. If you just crash into bed and turn off the lights, the engine is still roaring at full speed.
So taking that long wind-down time isn't about being lazy or self-indulgent. It's about respecting the reality of your biology.
It is giving yourself permission to operate your specific machine according to its actual manual rather than someone else's.
So if we pull back and look at the big picture here, we've got the DOES framework explaining the innate wiring. We know that standard CBT can accidentally flood the system by moving too fast and invalidating the senses. And the solution is validating that biological reality, slowing down the pace of exposure and actively managing the daily stimulation budget.
Precisely. The ultimate goal of this adapted therapy isn't to somehow make the HSP less sensitive. That is a fool's errand. It's biologically impossible. You can't change the hardware. The goal is to make them highly skillful at managing the trait.
To become an absolute expert in your own user manual.
Yes. To stop trying to be a Toyota Camry when you are actually built like a Formula One car.
I love that analogy so much.
It fits perfectly. Both are cars. Both are completely valid ways to get around. But if you take a Formula One car and try to drive it exactly like a daily commuter sedan, if you run it on cheap, regular gas, if you never let the engine cool down, if you don't give it specialized tuning, it will just break down. But if you treat it like a Formula One car,
It performs incredibly.
it can do things the Camry can't even dream of doing.
And, looking through all this source material and really digesting it, I kept thinking about the broader implications of this. As a society, we so often treat sensitivity like it's a problem to be solved or cured. But the philosopher in me really wonders, what are we missing out on by doing that?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
If we constantly force HSPs to toughen up and numb themselves out just to survive in a really loud, fast-paced world, we are losing all that high-definition data they naturally collect. We are losing the profound empathy. We are losing the depth of processing that actually solves complex systemic problems.
It is an evolutionary advantage, completely hidden in plain sight. But it only works as an advantage if the environment actually allows it to function without burning the person out.
So here's a thought I want to leave you with today as you go back out into your week. We spend so much time and energy trying to force HSPs to fit into the standard world. But what would the world look like if it were actually designed by highly sensitive persons? What would our workplaces, our schools, our daily schedules look like?
I think they would be a lot more human.
And probably a whole lot quieter.
Definitely a lot quieter.
Well, thanks for diving into this with us.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Take care of your nervous systems out there, everyone. We will see you next time.